Good afternoon. In this final chapter, yes, I know, please try and keep the merriment down quite a bit. I can hear you all the way here in Selma. We're talking about using technology to manage information. A somewhat relatively new concept, although old school technology has been utilized for years and years. Now, one of the things that we were typically talking about in the 1970s, yes, I realize that may very well be before some of you were born, is when we looked at the idea of data processing, or basically the movement of data or raw, unanalyzed, and unorganized facts and figures from one place to another, from one position to another. And you need to remember, and it's important in this concept, that data is in fact that raw grouping of unanalyzed and unorganized facts and figures, as opposed to information, which information is processed and organized data or data that managers can use for decision making. Now, of course, we're talking mostly about information systems and information technology, or IS and IT. Many organizations of any size whatsoever these days will have IT departments. I know it's typically not like the commercial on TV that's prevalent these days, where the young man is talking about being worried about liquid being next to the keyboard. Folks, it's a lot more involved than that. Now, technology in the early 2000s took on a parlance, if you will, known as business intelligence, or BI. And as this says, BI is basically any of a variety of software applications that analyze the data of organizations, utilize it and organize it, organize and utilize it as information, and then take and make insights from that information, from that organized and analyzed information, that will assist their organization in mostly financial matters. Now, of course, one thing that you can see on the slide entitled Further Evolution, tablets. Tablets have taken this game up a notch beyond. Example, I was recently in Verizon Wireless. They utilize tablets. They utilize tablets to check information on you, to check information as far as inventory in store and the availability of different types of products and services, and also, quite honestly, to utilize as a checkout transaction of sorts, if you will. Now, technology definitely brings changes. We have issues currently, although it has gotten better, for example, with the insurance website utilized for the Affordable Care Act. And this puts us into a position, of course, of having issues with the technology that we have in place, good and bad. Now, how does this affect employment? Well, it can greatly affect employment, as is seen by the graphic titled "The Top U.S. Cities by High-Tech Employment." You see New York at 310,000 people employed by high-tech firms, Washington, D.C., 295,000, San Jose and Silicon Valley, 225,000, and so on and so forth. This is definitely a large catalyst, or a large engine, if you will, for the or to be utilized as a driver for business and job opportunities in our country these days. Now, what type of information is available? Well, it seems these days as if everything is available, good or bad. But what we are probably looking at can be organized into 5 different categories. That of business process information itself, in other words, the processes that are involved when utilizing this information for business purposes. Physical world observations, in other words, the physical world around these marketplaces, and of course, in this situation, we are again speaking of a global marketplace. Biological data that can be utilized for different forms of business transactions and different avenues of available business information. Public data itself, for example, demographics, excuse me, that are utilized concerning businesses and consumers. And finally, data that indicates personal preferences or intentions. Most of the data that drives the marketing of this day and age. Now, four characteristics that make information useful: quality, completeness, timeliness, and relevance. The higher the quality of the information, the more useful it is. The more complete that the information is, at least complete for the application that you need the information for, the better. The timeliness of this information can be absolutely crucial, and the relevance of the information. For example, it makes absolutely no sense if you are a financial services firm that you would have information on how often a tree frog croaks. Now, of course, being very facetious in that fashion, again, we are looking at the relevance of the information being utilized for the particular organization that is attempting to utilize that information. Some of the new things that you will see these days, some that you may have heard of, some that you may have not. Skype, many people utilize Skype these days. This can be especially useful because the cost of travel is still very high, and Skype is a real-time form of communication and can greatly reduce the overall costs of business meetings and transactions. Google Docs, or Google Documents, if you will, utilizes a storage place for this type of information that can be acted upon by more parties than just one. Makes it very easy to trade information back and forth between entities and to adjust and manipulate that information as may seem useful for those different facets, those different entities. Basecamp and SurveyMonkey, and folks, there are many, many, many more. Now, how should you effectively utilize all the electronic files that you have? First of all, one of the easiest ways is to utilize email, your particular email program's organizing tools. This may sound rather simplistic, and of course it is. However, you can set up several different distinct folders within many email programs, and you can absolutely utilize the delineation of information into appropriate areas. You should always use consistent file names. That way you know what type of file it is by the file name. It is always suggested that you use online backup services, not only for the idea of data being hacked, folks, but for the idea of having data issues, data spills, if you will, that can happen from time to time. And finally, a good solid desktop search software. It will put things at your fingertips in a much more rapid rate than has even been possible in days gone by. How do you organize all of this glut? Quite simply, many organizations utilize data warehouses, and there are entire businesses devoted to this data warehousing, if you will. Because, folks, one thing that you need to remember, every time you enter any type of data online, it can be there seemingly forever. And that means that everything that you put on can be there. Everything that your associate puts on can be there. Everything that the individual in the business down the street, in the next city, in the next state, in the next country, or anywhere around the globe can be there. The idea, of course, is that the scope of this gathering, of this data warehousing, can seem to be somewhat infinite. Now, some things that we can look at beyond just the idea of the internet itself are intranets, which are defined as company-wide networks that are closed to public access that will utilize intranet-like technology. An example of one of these would be the intranet that is utilized when I worked at Sallie Mae. It had several different types of in-house pieces of information involved. For example, that's where you clocked in, that's where you clocked out. That they posted new job openings and new job opportunities within the organization there, and so on and so forth. It can be a useful, very useful tool, an in-house tool again, for the individuals that are members of an organization. An extranet, in contrast, is a semi-private network that lets more than one company access the same information. In other words, in a form of collaboration, if you will. Of course, the issue with this is that once you place something upon this extranet, you are at the very least allowing everyone in what might become your competitors or your competition, you allow them to see, perhaps, although not quite to this level, but perhaps what can be looked upon as your trade secrets. There's also a VPN, or virtual private network, and this is simply a data network that creates secure connections, tunnels, over regular internet lines. In other words, from point A to point B, that connection is more secure than just the internet itself, although it exists within the overall internet. Now, increasing internet power, most of the time what you will hear about is broadband. We don't have enough broadband. We're clogging up what broadband we have. And folks, quite simply, the more people that are engaged within an organization's broadband capabilities, the slower those transactions or those searches or those actions will be. So, for example, around grade time, when everybody's trying to look at grades, when everybody's trying to place grades, when all of the instructors are trying to place grades upon final records and in grade books, it states when you submit, there may be up to a 30-minute wait before this is submitted, because it comes back with confirmation that your changes have been properly submitted. And it may simply be up to a 30-minute wait, and that is because so many people are trying to do basically the same thing at once. This is part and parcel of the reason for the slowdown of the Affordable Care Act website, because they simply did not have it properly designed to accept the number of consumers that it had to accept. Now, there are such things in certain organizations known as broadband caps. Broadband cap is simply a cap over the amount of broadband that a customer can use. For example, perhaps 5 gigabytes, perhaps 10 gigabytes. there is so much that a consumer or a customer may use. Sometimes that is the total amount they are able to use whatsoever. Other times that's the total amount they're able to use for perhaps for no fee or for a small fee. And if they go over that, a fee or a higher fee can be charged. However, as the slide states, average usage is well below caps in most instances. Now, of course, social media has kind of blown this idea wide open. Social media is still, such as Facebook and Twitter, still in its infancy in considering the importance that it will play in the business world. People are simply just sometimes beginning to find out how powerful a tool this can be, especially, for example, for marketing purposes and for basically getting out the message of issues, both good and bad, that may be taking place with your business and your business organization. Well, there are two things that I'll touch briefly on. First is Web 2.0, and it's basically a set of tools that allow people to build social and business connections, share information, and collaborate on projects online. YouTube and Twitter are among the largest Web 2.0 companies. An example, of course, right here of these lectures that I'm placing on YouTube. This is a very easy tool to utilize. Sometimes there are issues with it, as I have found, but typically those issues are perhaps a lack of proper understanding of the technology itself. And of course, Twitter, the same situation. At 140, 160 characters, you can pass a lot of information on to a lot of followers or a lot of people, if you will, at one time. And of course, with tweeting and retweeting going on, this in effect can be a very broad network that is reached. Now, there's also Web 3.0, which is defined as a combination of technologies that adds intelligence and changes how people interact with the web and vice versa. For example, as you pull data, excuse me for that interruption, that's my dog barking at my son. Web 3.0 adds intelligence, and the idea is as you pull data out of a system, out of the internet, if you will, the system learns about you and your interests and pushes information you may like to you. For example, if you pull the data out concerning products that are for people that are left-handed, it will then push information to you only on products that are left-handed, on other products that you may not have seen yet. It's simply the idea of trying to use the type of intelligence that's laid upon this type of advertising and this type of marketing to make things more relevant and more pertinent to you. Now, we're of course looking at coming through a personal computer environment to simply an internet environment, if you will. For example, the utilization of smartphones, iPhones. For example, I have 5 different email accounts that come through to my iPhone right now and don't even have all of my email accounts through to my iPhone. Another usage can, of course, be notebooks and the in-dash computers and cars. This can be very, very helpful, very, very useful. And, of course, the idea of iPads and other types of tablets. This is simply making the process more useful, more easy, more user-friendly, if you will. Now, Are these apps in fact intelligent? Can they be looked at as intelligent? Yes, the idea that we're looking at here is number one, we're still in the infancy phase when it comes to apps. Although it may not seem like that, some of the newer ones that you have seen, because they can be incredibly involved. For example, take global positioning system or GPS system apps. They can be very useful. They can also be slightly expensive, but they can be very useful. They, however, will of course track your every move and can be utilized to track your every move. Some apps can cause security headaches, and some simply will not be used, will not be tolerated to be utilized in business situations. And again, we are in the infancy of understanding and writing the proper rules and procedures as pertains to many organizations with this kind of usage. Example, Sallie Mae, to my understanding, still does not allow cell phones on the business floor. And the reason for that is quite simple. You are not allowed to take a picture of anyone's credit. That is private information. So you are not allowed to have any device upon you that might allow you to do that. Because, folks, information is always worth money. Now, these days, of course, we are talking more and more about cloud computing. Cloud computing is simply a form of virtualization, which is a process that allows network computers to run multiple operating systems and programs through one central computer at the same time. And cloud computing is a form of that virtualization that stores the company's data and applications at off-site data centers that are accessed online. In other words, you don't have to necessarily have the physical storage space yourself. Now, do you have to pay for this? Well, absolutely. These types of things aren't free, folks. But as with carrying excessive inventory costing your organization money, having excess data storage costs money also. And it has quite simply been found that cloud computing can be very, very effective and very, very efficient. Now, the advantages of cloud computing beyond that, an absolute reduce of software costs. You don't have to have the physical piece of software to analyze and to work upon this raw data to turn it into information. Those kinds of operations can be taken care of in the cloud, depending upon how your cloud is based and what organization it is based through. Improve security. Folks, it's quite simply an improved security situation because that is part of the selling points. That's one of the selling points. Capacity, again, you don't have to have the capacity yourself in-house, if you will, when it exists out there. This is much the same as physical warehousing. When you have external warehousing or outsourced warehousing, you now have outsourced the warehousing of your data. The equipment that is necessary, again, can be very costly, and you don't have to have that for your data alone. You can utilize the cloud in which an organization will have that equipment for everyone that utilizes that cloud computing, thus spreading the total cost of the equipment amongst all of the customers of that particular cloud. And quite honestly, access. When there are no issues, access is virtually instantaneous. And again, with all of the first four matters assisted by the efficiency and the effectiveness of this, it absolutely makes this access an almost a point that a business cannot afford to do without in this day and age. Now, disadvantages, there can still be security breaches. Nothing is foolproof. Nothing is absolutely perfect, folks. Sometimes there are stability issues. A lot of times that will depend upon the capability of the company that you utilize. In other words, you get what you pay for, and the control of data. They do, in fact, have some control of your data. Instead of course, when you have it in-house, you have primary and sole control of that data. So that can be an issue. And it simply boils down to whether these three disadvantages outweigh the advantages. I would believe that most of the time you will find in most organizations that it does not. Now, a couple of things that you may have heard about and wondered about, and talking about software. First of all is shareware. Shareware is copyrighted software, but it's distributed free of charge with a request that users send a specific fee to the developer if they decide to use it. Now, it's not absolutely necessary that you send that fee. It is simply a request. Now, that is contrasted with public domain software or freeware that is completely and absolutely free for the taking. Many programs that are utilized. For example, some of you may have utilized programs such as OpenDocs, which is basically a word processing. I believe they have an email program. I think they also have spreadsheet programs, excuse me, that you can basically utilize for free. Excuse me. And these days, they have many of the features of the pieces of software, such as Microsoft Office. And this can be a good thing, because what this does is it pushes organizations like Microsoft to further develop more bells and whistles that you believe and understand that you need and want with regards to their software. Quite honestly, to market their software to get you to purchase that instead of utilizing freeware. Now, some of the issues that we're looking at these days in technology. First and foremost, HR managers need to have people working for them that understand technology and that can train others in helping to understand this technology. Technology within organizations turns over at a much greater rate these days. And I'd be willing to bet that most of you at one point or another have spoken with someone, say, well, we're instituting a new system and we're just having some issues with it and there are some bugs we need to work out. Please bear with us. This is quite often true, folks, and the learning curve sometimes can be rather steep for these new pieces of software. And if you don't have people in-house that know how to directly reach the people in your organization that they are training, this can be a daunting proposition, because people coming in, excuse me, that will have this type of training off of the street, if you will, don't necessarily know the best way or the easiest way to get this training properly conveyed to the members of your organization. Now, there are also, of course, viruses are also, of course, phishing with a PH schemes. And the phishing schemes are simply a method to try and find a way for you to allow viruses into your system, either into your computer itself or into your overall system, in the case of a business organization. Basically, to wreak havoc. Now, how do you protect yourself against phishing? First of all, don't respond to emails that request personal information. Unless you have a prior method, a prior system set with a particular organization One should never do that. Next, you should always do your best to keep your computers updated with antivirus software. You should never provide or verify personal information online. You should never send sensitive personal information over emails. I know this is difficult and can be very difficult in business situations. These are suggested methods. And finally, you should always check monthly statements. You get a monthly statement from any type of financial institution, you should look that over to make sure that everything there is actually as it should be. Now, are there laws concerning internet usage? Absolutely. There are issues, however, surrounding the ideas of copyright infringement, the ideas of pornography and obscene material, the ideas of harassment, and the ideas of using the internet for scams. And as this slide points out, cybercrimes cost the United States billions of dollars each year. Part of the problem is, folks, is that we are so good at inventing new methods, new programs, new software to use that we're not often as good or as adept at keeping our legal framework up with these matters. In other words, we're fighting last year's battles. Of course, there's also the idea and the threat of cyber terrorism. Now, cyber terrorism is basically defined as the idea that terrorist hackers could shut down entire communication systems, could shut down monetary supplies, could shut down the electricity grid, and could shut down transportation, physical transportation grid. This is, of course, possible. It is not as probable as it is possible. However, this idea exists, and we spend millions and billions of dollars each year in this country and other countries in an attempt to guard against this very type of cyber terrorism. Now, do we have privacy issues involved with technology? Of course we do. Email can be snooped and information can be stolen. Also, personal information that is stored can be stolen, can be hacked. Site owners can, in certain situations, share your information without your permission. It depends upon what the information is, and it depends upon whom they are sharing it with. And finally, cookies, or that little bit that is left when you click on a website, that little piece of information that is left can basically track your movement around the entire web. Now, realize that I went through that rather quickly. When we're looking at this, again, we are simply, folks, in the infancy of what is possible with data and information and the use of the internet. We are barely scratching the surface today, and it will be very interesting, possibly very exciting, and perhaps slightly daunting with what may come.